Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so excited that you've joined me this evening. You're really going to love tonight's story. But before I start, I just want to send my love to all my listeners around the world. I love you guys so much, and I really appreciate and thank you for all your support. It really is lovely having people like you tuning into my channel, and thank you so very much for subscribing. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the story. This is like 2 in 1, which you're really going to enjoy. We start off with a young girl who actually has a British mother and an American father, and she lives in England and then finally emigrates to America, where she has her Bigfoot encounter. But the encounter that she has in England is in fact a ghost encounter. So this is a very special story, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Ashley Jenkins, and I'm writing to tell you about 2 curious occurrences that happened to me growing up. In some bizarre way, they are related because of my ghost experience. I rarely became open to alternative realities and began to realize that our lives are not as clear-cut as we may think they are. I realized that there was so much more to our reality than just what we think and what we can physically see. And so I assure you, after this, my first supernatural encounter, I was definitely not one of the doubters as far as Bigfoot was concerned. I was open to the possibility of absolutely anything, which in a strange way gives you so much freedom in your life, because you are free to explore even improbable things with an open mind, and that is incredibly liberating. So on with my story. First of all, I would like to tell you that I'm half English and half American. I was born in Hampshire in England to my English mother and my American father. When I was 12 years old, we moved to a beautiful English country cottage in the heart of the Hampshire countryside. The cottage was over 400 years old, so it had immense character and charm, and the English love their historic buildings. The stone cottage, covered with its red rambling climbing roses and flourishing purple wisteria, really gave you the feeling of stepping back in time. Beautiful large style French windows were ubiquitous in every room in the house, enabling the interiors to be light, fresh and airy, as well as offering the most ravishing views over the beautiful meadows beyond. The front door was painted in a bright red enamel, which rarely brought out the colours of the masterful stonework that had stood the test of time. The cottage was listed as a Grade 2 historic building, as no modern alterations could be done to the cottage without seeking planning permission first. The garden was very small and quaint, with a few apple trees dotted around the place here and there, and it was fenced in by a wicket-style fence that consisted of 2 wooden panels. It overlooked the most beautiful backdrop of rolling hills, stunning and glorious meadows and forest. On many occasions there were beautiful racehorses in the field belonging to the lord of the manor, who lived in the huge mansion behind us. He was fanatical about racing his thoroughbreds, which were among the most magnificent regal horses that I have ever seen. I always remember giving them polo mints, which they loved, and apples from my tree over the fence. They really had the loveliest personable natures. Sometimes the lord of the manor let out the field to a neighbouring farmer, and then we would have sheep in the field, and that was also fun. On one occasion I even got to raise a little lamb on a bottle, and it was the cutest thing I'd ever seen. He grew up believing that he was a dog, as he followed our dog Oscar everywhere he went and imitated him to the top in everything he did, like catching a ball, lifting his leg over a bush to pee, and rolling over in delight to have his stomach scratched. When I returned the lamb to the farmer, he was amazed to see that the creature gravitated towards his own working sheepdogs and ignored the other sheep in the field because he thought he was a sheepdog too. So the farmer raised him as one of his dogs, and he even assisted them in chasing after the other sheep. I gather he remained a happy member of their family for many years. Luckily for him, he avoided ending up as a tasty leg of lamb on the dinner table. My family settled into village life very quickly, and we were welcomed by all the people who lived in the village, who were warm and friendly. We would have village fetes and vegetable competitions to see who would grow the largest vegetables in their gardens. I kid you not, some of those pumpkins were monstrously huge. Fox hunting with hounds was also common in the village, and an occasion of regal pomp and ceremony. The horn would be blown, initiating the start of the hunt, and then the riders, dressed in their bright red jackets and white jodhpurs, would go galloping through the countryside until the hounds had traced the smell of the fox, and it would not be long before they had gathered their trophy in between their excitable jaws, and would wrestle each other over the prize in between yaps of delirious delight. My story starts when I'd come back from a trip to Ireland on the ferry to visit my great-grandmother, and I think I must have caught chicken pox from one of the people on that ferry crossing. I know that the next morning I broke out in this huge rash all over my body of tan-coloured spots, and I was not sure what it was, and neither were my parents, but they knew that they should call out the doctor in case whatever I had was infectious. My parents called for the doctor to come at 11 o'clock that morning, and so when we heard a loud knocking at our front door at 10 o'clock, we were surprised that the doctor had arrived a whole hour earlier than was scheduled, but gladly we let him into our home. Imagine my father's surprise when he opened the door to a man wearing a huge top hat from another time. He was dressed with a crisp white shirt and a black jacket with tails and black pants, and the shiniest black shoes you have ever seen, that you could literally see your reflection in. He was also wearing one of those old-fashioned pocket watches. My father was amused by the doctor's appearance. He was used to the oddity and quirky behaviours of the English by now, and so thought that this man, whoever he was an eccentric type, or maybe he was dressing up for some kind of role play for an English historic event. Those sort of things do happen often in our part of the world. "You must be the doctor," he said. "I like the tails thingy," he said, pointing to the doctor's jacket in humour. "Would you like to come in?" "How is she?" asked the doctor. "I got your message and came immediately." "Oh, I thought you were coming at 11, said my father. "Our daughter is covered all over with brown spots, and we are just a little concerned about her." "All in good time," said the doctor. In his hands he carried an old-fashioned doctor's case. He entered my bedroom with a huge smile. "How is the patient?" he asked, touching my forehead with his hands. When he did that, I felt a rush of cold air go right through my whole body, and I did remark on how cold his hands were. He examined my spots and told me that I had chicken pox, and that it was very common and could be very serious if you did not look after yourself. "Chicken pox? Common?" asked my father in surprise. "I thought we had eradicated it with all the advances in vaccines. Should she have not been vaccinated from it?" The doctor did not reply. Instead, he opened his strange suitcase and proceeded to examine my ears, and asked me to open my mouth so that he could look at the back of my throat. "Say ah," he said. "Ah, say ah, ah." And he looked into the back of my throat with a weird-looking instrument, but such that I have never seen before. "Just make sure you give her plenty of fluids, lots of fresh chicken broth, and plenty of rest. You cannot go out until you are no longer infectious. That will be all," he said, and with that he tottered out of the house and vanished. The next thing we knew was that someone was knocking on the door. "Not again," groaned my father. "Who is it now?" My dad opened the door to a gentleman wearing a white doctor's coat over his clothes. He told my baffled father that he was the call-out doctor for my 11 o'clock appointment. "We have already seen the doctor who came out to see my daughter at 11. He diagnosed her with chicken pox." The doctor was perplexed, his forehead wrinkles furrowed, with an expression of confusion on his face. "I don't understand that. I'm the only one on duty for call-outs in the Hampshire area this morning," he said, looking completely floored. "What did you say this person looked like? Maybe I might know him." My father described the doctor who had attended the earlier appointment with me. "You sound like you're talking about a ghost," laughed the doctor jovially. "There's no one working for us that looks remotely like that. Are you sure someone is not winding you up or playing a joke on you?" "I hope not," said my father, ushering the doctor inside and looking extremely bewildered. The doctor examined me and confirmed the previous diagnosis from the first doctor, and that I did indeed have chickenpox. Imagine my shock when I found out later from my next-door neighbour that the doctor that visited me had been dead for many long years. He had died in 1924 on the 21st of February. I even got to visit his gravestone in the local cemetery, and there it was. His name was William Gladstone. He had lived in my neighbour's house during the Victorian times and would perform house calls within the Hampshire area. My neighbour showed my family a picture of the doctor, and it was the very man who had visited me the day that I was sick. I remember he was as real and lifelike as you and me, and that is what astonished me most. And his hands had been cold to the touch, but they were physically real, and that is a promise. How was this possible, I wondered. I was also to learn that this very same doctor had indeed visited 2 other people in the village when they fell sick, and they had had very similar experiences to me. I only saw this Victorian doctor one more time. He was walking along the village green at about 6 p.m. in the evening. I knew it was him. I recognized him in his top hat and tails. And then he just vanished before my eyes. That was the final confirmation for me that this man was indeed a ghost, because nothing just vanishes before your eyes like that. When I turned 14, my parents moved to North America, where we bought a beautiful cabin in the Tennessee countryside. I adored and loved my new life in America, and the locals there were so warm and friendly and welcoming to us in our new abode. It was not long before I heard someone talking about a person in the area who had seen a Bigfoot and was making fun of them by saying it was all a load of tot. I immediately asked him to explain to me what Bigfoot was, because at that stage I'd never heard of the creature. He told me in detail about the so-called hairy man, but was adamant that they did not exist. I was not so sure, because my mind was open, as I told you before, to any possibility, especially after my astonishingly ghostly encounter a couple of years before. One night in our home we heard whooping sounds coming from the wooded area of our land, and I was excited because I thought it could be a Bigfoot. My father told me not to go and investigate because he knew my curious nature. I was not about to listen to my dad. I never have when I'm being stubborn about something, but I waited for him and my mother to retire to bed. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I could hear my dad's loud snores. I slipped out into the woods wearing my nightgown with a pair of sneakers, and I carried a torch in my hands. It never even crossed my mind to carry a shotgun, probably because I come from England initially. I've never been afraid of the dark either, or really anything for that matter. All my life I tended to gravitate towards boyish things that just were so much more exciting for me, because boys are always adventurous, and I loved that. It was a dark evening and very quiet compared to normal, and I was surprised to hear that there were no crickets singing, but nothing on this earth would have discouraged me from the eager hope and expectation that I might even catch a glimpse of the elusive hairy man. As I approached the woods, I definitely heard wood knocks, and that made me extremely excited. I was now almost certain Bigfoot had to be around, and while I did not want to face a confrontation with the creature, I just wanted to see one with all my heart. The ground of the forest floor was covered with gold leaf litter and pieces of broken twigs, so it was exceedingly difficult to walk without making a noise. But believe me, I tried to be as quiet as I possibly could, which was far from easy, because the forest was so silent You could have heard a pin drop. Suddenly I heard someone whistling, which surprised me because I did not expect a human to be in the woods at night, and I did not know that Bigfoots could whistle. I could hear them walking as they crunched the leaves beneath their feet. I took the opportunity to hide behind a tree so that I could steal a glimpse of who was coming. I switched off the light of my torch and stood against the trunk listening. The person, whoever he was, continued to whistle, and he sounded heavy and large as he moved. He must be a big guy, I thought, whoever this person was walking around in the woods at night. It was most peculiar, but having lived in England for so long, I knew about eccentricities and oddities more than most. So a weird guy taking a late stroll in the middle of the night was not completely off my radar after all my experiences. I could hear that the person had entered the area close to where I was hiding, and I peeked at him expecting to see a man, and imagine my surprise when I discovered I was looking at a larger-than-life Bigfoot. I cannot begin to tell you in any words how thrilled and excited and overwhelmed with joy I felt. My heart was beating at 1,000 miles an hour, not from fear, but from the awe and wonder of this amazing and spectacular animal. It was dark in the forest, but the gaps in between the branches from the fallen leaves gave me some light, because it was late autumn and it enabled the moonlight to come through the trees. And that was when I got a good glimpse of the creature. He was about 6 foot tall, I think, and he had a bullet-shaped head, and much to my surprise, he did not appear to have any neck. It was like his head was stuck on those massive shoulders, which was peculiar. I noticed the torso was big, and I could tell that he had the flattest stomach ever, slender hips, and very strong, lean, muscular legs. He was covered in hair, but there were areas on his body where you could see the underlying grey skin, like on parts of his stomach, his knees, and his face. I could also see his genitals, so I knew he was a male. I could not see the details of his face, but I did detect some red eye shine. Suddenly I heard a knocking sound coming from further in the forest, and the creature answered by slapping his hand against the wood hard. It was amazing. It seemed only moments later that another Bigfoot appeared, but it was standing in a spot that was way too dark for me to see it clearly. It just looked like a large, shadowy mass of black. I could hear the two creatures chattering together non-stop, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, and it sounded like a language that was spoken very fast. The creature I could see clearly took 3 dead rabbits from the other creature and carried them by their legs upside down and proceeded to walk back into the forest. And they chattered all the way like they were enjoying an amazing conversation. I will never know whether they knew I was hiding there or not. Anyway, whether they did or didn't, I'm glad that they ignored me, because a one-on-one encounter, even for me, may have been a little intimidating and overwhelming. So there you are. Those are my 2 stories that made me a believer of the unexplained and supernatural. And one thing is for sure, I know that Bigfoot is real. I hope you enjoyed my story. I just want to say that was an amazing story. I love the fact that we got introduced to the English lifestyle and then we go into an American lifestyle, and 2 very different encounters, both which were absolutely extraordinary. I really loved the visitation of the doctor coming to see you and being larger than life and being real, and the fact that other people in that village had experienced the very same thing that you did. That was amazing. And the fact that you actually got to see a Bigfoot and believed in him without doubting, that in itself is incredible, because that takes faith. And maybe that's what we need, is to have a little faith and an open mind. I just want to send my love to all my viewers anywhere in the world for being so involved with my channel. I really appreciate your encouragement and support. Until next time, goodbye and good night.